The government is stopping the boats, as we promised we would, in the way we said we would. Yesterday, the November report of Operation Sovereign Borders was released, showing once again there had been no arrivals during the month. That is the 10th month this year where that has occurred. It wasn't always thus, as last night's 7:30 report demonstrated, for the men and women of our Customs and Border Protection Service and our Navy. Under Minister Burke, there was an average of 26 boats per month. Under Minister O'Connor, there was an average of 37 boats per month. Under Minister Bowen, there was an average of 14 boats per month, and under his watch, 398 boats turned up. The result of all of that was cost, chaos and tragedy, and almost 1,200 deaths. This has stopped, as we said it would. Our other major commitment at the election was to resolve the legacy caseload of some 30,000 people who arrived illegally by boat under Labor, who they failed to process. Some 22,400 people of these did not even have their processing commence under the previous government, for some going back as far as August of 2012. On coming to government, we sought to restore temporary protection visas in line with our election mandate. This was rejected by Labor and the Greens in the Senate on 2 occasions. Despite their rejection, we have kept our commitment not to honour the people smugglers' promise of providing permanent visas to those who came illegally on the smugglers' boats. The new Senate provided an opportunity to bring some resolution to this issue, to end the uncertainty for the 30,000 people left behind by Labor, to get these people processed. Labor and the Greens dealt themselves out of this dialogue. They chose denial and their ideological opposition to turnbacks and temporary protection visas over cleaning up the mess that they themselves created. They have made themselves irrelevant to the solution. I've been negotiating with senators who are interested in outcomes and solutions, rather than the rhetoric we have heard from Labor and the hand-wringing we have seen from the Greens, who never have any viable solutions. Labor and the Greens are the problem and have shown no interest in being part of the solution. Today, the Migration and Maritime Powers Legislation Amendment resolving the Legacy Caseload Bill has begun its second reading debate in the Senate. This is a package of measures which seeks to resolve the legacy caseload of 30,000 people left behind by Labor. The bill makes our borders stronger. It honours our commitment to restore temporary protection visas, to strengthen our powers for turnbacks and support the men and women of our Navy and Customs and Border Protection Service who protect our borders at sea, and to provide an efficient and fair process to resolve the cases of some 30,000 people. As a result of discussions with the crossbenchers, the government has agreed to the following measures, some of which were previously announced following my discussions with the Palmer United Party earlier this year. Subject to the passage of legislation, as announced with Clive Palmer, the approximately 1,500 people who arrived illegally by boat between July 19 and December 31, 2013 would not be transferred to Nauru for processing, but will be taken into the legacy caseload for processing in Australia. This will reduce the number of children in detention, which I note is already down by 50% since we were elected, so that's around 700 less children, by a further 460 children at least. The government will also introduce a Safe Haven Enterprise Visa, or a SHEV. This will enable those who are found to be refugees under the process set out in the bill, who work or study in a designated regional area to be able to apply for an onshore visa subject to meeting all the requirements of those visas for which they are applying and subject to satisfactory acquittal of the terms of their SHEV. The government will introduce amendments to make clear the opportunity presented by the SHEV as requested. In relation to onshore applications in particular, and for other visas, and ensure that such visas cannot be capped. Specifically, we will be articulating the matters set out in the letter that codified the agreement between Mr Palmer and I announced early this year. What is in that letter will be in the legislation. Everything we agreed, the government will put forward in that legislation. As a result of discussions with Senator Xenophon as well as Senator Day and Senator Leonholm, and I stress also drawing on the feedback I've had from government members who I want to note: Wyatt Roy, Teresa Gambaro, Luke Howarth, Craig Laundy, David Coleman, Nick Vivaris, Sarah Henderson, Michael Sukker, Natasha Griggs and Matt Williams. The government will provide work rights to those on bridging visas while they undergo their processing under the provisions of this bill. There are currently 25,000 people currently on these bridging visas. Also, as a result of the discussions with everyone I've just mentioned, but particularly I want to thank Senators Xenophon, Day and Leonholm, after clearing the legacy caseload backlog, the government will increase the refugee and humanitarian intake in the next budget by a total of 7,500 places over the budget and forward estimates, with a 2,500 increase in year 3 and a 5,000 increase in year 4, taking the intake in that year to 18,750. This increase, at a cost of more than $100 million, will be fully funded by offsets that I have committed to within my portfolio. If you're going to increase the intake, you've got to pay for it. As previously stated, all TPVs and SHEVs granted will be in addition to our annual intake currently at 13,750. Not taken out of the intake of that 13,750, as occurred under Labor with their intake, where 5,000 of those 20,000 visas went to people that arrived illegally by boat. Under our process, the people under that stream would be given TPVs or SHEVs, and that would be in addition to the 13,750. This government broke the nexus where someone waiting for a place offshore is denied a place by someone who's coming on a boat. That doesn't happen anymore under this government, as occurred up until last election. The government will also hardwire these commitments we've made on the intake by placing the projected minimum annual intake within a disallowable instrument that cannot be varied without change to this instrument. In other words, that intake can't be reduced unless the instrument is changed, which can be disallowed by the Senate. In addition, the government has agreed with Senator Xenophon to amendments that will result in greater alignment with UNHCR definitions and guidelines within the provisions, and there are many of these provisions. Greater clarity around assessment processes, ensuring that the processes are not just efficient and quick, but also free of bias and conform with the natural justice principles set out in the Act. We'll also be restricting the fast-track processes established in the bill to the legacy caseload only, again through a disallowable instrument. Some have argued that these measures provide the minister with extra powers. This was a little confusing at the time when it was put to us. The only matter where the minister would have had some discretionary power was the ability to apply these fast-track processes to other caseloads. The government is very pleased to not have that authority unilaterally, and the government will ensure that if this fast-track process, which is set out in this bill, is to be applied to any other caseload than the legacy caseload that has been identified, then that would be a disallowable instrument, which could obviously be disallowed by the Senate. The amendments that I've outlined will be introduced by the government in the course of the debate, and there are still some amendments, particularly in relation to the codification of the specifics in the letter to Mr Palmer that will be available later today. Finally, the government has also agreed to refer a proposal by Senator Leonholm for a new way to attract legitimate economic migrants to Australia who want to come to work and make a new life for them and their family in Australia to the Productivity Commission for analysis. We're pleased to refer that matter to the Productivity Commission and allow that policy to be further reviewed. Senator Leonholm will have more to say about this, and I'll be happy for him to fill in the details on this, and the terms of reference will be circulated once finalised. The prevailing focus of our discussions has been to resolve and therefore improve the situation for the 30,000 people Labor left behind. They should not languish anymore. And that is why it's important that we deal with this matter this week. I don't want to see, if there's the opportunity to take children off Christmas Island before Christmas, then I would like to see us do that this week. Crossbench senators, I know, do not ideally support all the measures that are in these bills. this bill. These are the government's measures. What they have done is come forward constructively to be part of the way forward and to enable us to move on from the debilitating debates of the past. The measures and agreements the government have given would not have been possible 12 months ago because the boats had not stopped, particularly in relation to the restoration of work rights and the incorporation of the 1,500 post-July 19 arrivals into the legacy caseload, which will enable us to bring those children out of detention. The government has been true to our commitments, but pragmatic to get an outcome on our borders, and our borders will be stronger as a result of this bill passing. For anyone seeking to come to Australia by boat, you will be stopped, you will be turned back, and you will never come to Australia. That was most recently demonstrated over last weekend with that Sri Lankan venture. For those who are already here, we are not offering you in this bill what you were promised by the people smuggler. But thanks to the crossbenchers, should the bill pass, people's claims will be processed efficiently and fairly. Families and children will be released from detention. While they wait to have their claims processed, they will be able to work and support themselves and be a lesser burden on the taxpayer. There will be a sensible and funded increase in our humanitarian intake that will kick in once the backlog of Labor's legacy caseload has been resolved. And those who have been waiting years for their cases to be heard will now be processed. I want to thank the crossbenchers for their engagement of what has been a process of around 6 months. The ultimate determination of this bill is in the hands of the Senate. It is not for me to commentate on the position of individual senators. I will leave that to those senators. But I thank them for the good faith discussions we have been in. We are all very aware of what we've discussed and what we'd like to achieve, and I'm happy for the Senate to now to consider the matter. But I note this, we need to move forward, and the government will need to move forward on this. We will need to process these individuals, and we cannot allow this matter to continue to go on in the way it has, which is being in a holding pattern because of the intransigence of Labor and the Greens previously in the Senate. This is our opportunity to make this situation better, and I frankly commend the bill to the Senate.
Minister, the safe haven enterprise visas, can you just clarify the length of them, the duration of them? Can you reapply for a new one, and is it in any way a pathway to permanency?
Well, it is, and the amendments that we'll be introducing make that even clearer. It's a 5-year visa, and as we announced previously, for those who go to designated regional areas, those designations are made by those areas themselves, as I noted previously in this room, and where they go to those places and effectively work for 3.5 out of those 5 years, or study for 3.5 out of those 5 years, and obviously don't draw down benefits if they had been working for more than 1.5 years, then they will be entitled to make an onshore application for another visa. Now that could be a 457 visa if they've acquired the skills over that period of time. Working on a bridging visa currently, they could commence the process of seeking to get those skills that would put them in a position to be able to apply for a skilled visa. But equally, they could apply for a student visa. They could apply for any number of other visas, which are set out in the amendments that will be introduced into the Senate. And I think that's a good initiative. It was a product of the discussions that Mr Palmer and I had, and I look forward. It's a matter for Palmer United Party, what they do in the Senate. I'm not going to speculate on that, other than to say we will be putting into the Senate exactly what we agreed in our letter.
Mr. Morrison, just to be 100% clear, that they can apply for those other visas, but they can't get permanency in Australia.
No, that's not what I said.
Well, could you explain, please?
Well, the list of visas that they can potentially apply for, such as a skilled visa, an employer-nominated sponsored visa, for example, they could apply for. But they would have to have the skills and the requisite qualifications that would enable them to make such an application. What this does is it says to people who are in this situation, and it is confined to this legacy caseload. Anyone else who was thinking of coming to Australia by boat, you know what will happen. Border Protection Command will deal with that. But those who are already here as part of this legacy caseload, if they acquit themselves under the Chev, then they will have the same opportunity that someone in Pakistan or the United Kingdom or Singapore or anywhere like that would have to apply for one of those visas. Now, they have to meet the criteria. If they don't meet the criteria, then obviously they can't get the visa.
Including a refugee
They don't have the opportunity to apply for a permanent protection visa, no. The only protection visa that is available to those who have applied illegally by boat is a temporary protection visa or a safe haven enterprise visa, which are both temporary visas. I should have also mentioned that there will be an amendment which deals with temporary protection visas, because as you know, that denies people family reunion, and as does the Chev, as well as denying people the ability to leave and come to the country they wouldn't be able to return. In compassionate circumstances, such as the death of a relative, in a country other than the one that they claim to have, they'll be persecuted, then those cases could be considered on a case-by-case on compassionate grounds, which would enable them to return, to participate in a family funeral or something of that nature, and then come back to Australia. They'd come back on the same visa they were previously on.
Have you received any notification from the Palmer United Party as to whether they'll back the legislation with these changes?
I have the letter between Clive and myself, which I tabled in the Parliament previously, and that's the basis upon which these amendments are being put to the Senate.
Would it be acceptable for you for the Senate to pass the TPV and Chev aspects of the bill, but not the other parts, or is it a total package?
My negotiations have been about a complete package.
And secondly, if the bill is not passed by the Senate, would you still proceed with processing the legacy caseload and allow them work rights?
Well, I'm not going to speculate on the second part of the question. My focus is continuing to work with the crossbenchers on the bill passing, because the bill passing will mean that people will be processed, that children and families will come out of detention, that our maritime powers will be strengthened to support our Navy and Customs and Border Protection personnel, and that the refugee intake will be ultimately increased, and people who are waiting for their claims to be processed will have work rights. That is a very strong package. I'm sure even you would agree, Michael.
Mr Morrison, can I clarify the issue on the bridging visas? Are the work rights contingent on the legislation passing?
Yes.
The lack of work rights in the time while they've been waiting, do you acknowledge that's made it harder for these people now to settle in or to seek employment in Australia?
It is difficult, but as I said before, the ability to now provide work rights, we believe, given the success we've had with our other border protection measures, would not create the pull fact that it would have previously. And that's why we are in a position where the previous government was not, I think, to be able to move on the issue of work rights.
Ms Morrison, is there currently an internal review in how many refugees can apply to resettle in Australia?
I'm dealing with the bill today, Sarah. That's what I'm dealing with today.
Your government senators said some of the measures in the bill should be reviewed after 3 years because they were so extraordinary. Would this fast-tracking regime would there be a sunset on it? Or?
Well, the intention is that we would be able to process this caseload within 3 years, and I would hope that point would be moot.
There'll definitely be a vote today or tomorrow on this.
Well, we will work this through the Senate. I'm a humble member of the House of Representatives who doesn't pretend to understand the mysteries of the Senate, and I will allow senators to deal with this bill in the way that they deal with it, and I'll be working with them and respecting their processes.
But you're not going to get the kids out of Christmas Island by Christmas?
Well, this is a matter for the Senate.
And just to be explicit, finally, this is no pathway to permanent residency. Is that right?
Well, I can only refer to you what I said.
Those visas, but can you just? Is this a pathway to permanent
No,
residency?
I'll just tell you what I've told you before. At the end of a Chev, people can apply for visas which include permanent visas, not a permanent protection visa, but they would have to satisfy the requirements of those visas, and they would have had to have satisfied the conditions of the Chev which they are on. Now, that is a very specific corridor that they would have to move through, and that would be a matter for them. But I've got to say, if someone is able to do that, and if someone is able to work themselves into having that opportunity, then good for them. Good for them.
Would you expect that to happen very often?
Look, I can't really speculate, Lenore. The opportunity is there, and how people respond is up to them.
Mr Morrison, in increasing the humanitarian intake, are there any particular areas that you are looking at taking those in queues?
Not at this stage. As you know, we've got 4,400 people coming out of the program this year for Syria and Iraq, which frankly was more than what Labor did even in their final year. And I noticed some comments that were made by the Deputy Leader of the Opposition, Tanya Plibersek, on that yesterday. I mean, that doesn't bear out with the combined intake of Syria and Iraq. We will continue to do that. But the humanitarian intake, I think, has to be quite responsive to situations as they present. That's certainly how we deal with it. And so that's what the intake would be, but I'm not going to speculate on what the priority needs might be in those 2 out years. And I think that, it's the responsibility of the minister in those circumstances to set the program based on the needs.
Will you continue to work with the UNHCR with that?
We continue to work with the UNHCR.
What's your plan B if this doesn't get through the Senate?
I'm on plan A.
You can see that these people who came on boats under Labor's watch, you would have said at the time, I'm sure, there's no way they should be allowed to settle permanently in Australia.
Well, that is our policy.
But you just said there is a way for them to keep applying for
It has
visas.
never been our policy to provide a permanent protection visa to people who come illegally on boats. And this bill doesn't provide it, and this government will never provide
It's
it.
not a permanent protection visa.
Well, that's
but an
what I
ability
was.
to stay permanently.
That has always been our policy. No permanent protection visa, no permanent passport to welfare for people who come illegally by boat. That's our policy. That's what's in this bill. That will always be where I stand.
Can I ask you about the two pregnant women from Nauru in Darwin, what their condition is?
They are in care in Darwin.
What sort of care?
Under the care of our IHMS and other doctors and service providers and local hospitals who are attending to their condition.
Do they come on a visa?
My understanding is they're fine. Yeah.
What's that visa? Do they come on a
Yeah.
visa?
I'm here to talk about the bill today, and I have to now keep talking to people who will be voting on that bill. So thanks for your time.